Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Feeding Frenzy. And this week we are jam-packed with a bunch of science and wellness or metabolic information that it's honestly crazy. I'm really excited to dive into today's episode, and so with that, we'll start with worth listening. And the first thing we have to talk about is understanding metabolic health with Dr. Casey Means on the Whoop podcast. This conversation was really entertaining for me and helped put habits and behaviors in a different context for me to make meaningful changes. First, let me give a little background. Dr. Casey Means is a Stanford-trained physician, chief medical officer, and co-founder of the metabolic health company Levels, and the associate editor of the International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention. As I mentioned, it helped me put my diet back into a better context. One wearable, which Levels provides, I'd like to experiment with, is the CGM or continuous glucose monitors, but it's not necessary to have insights into how your body responds to food. And so one idea from this podcast is that we should avoid spiking our glucose throughout the day. Typically, this comes to food that we would discount, like a full helping of rice or a tortilla. So the best way to avoid this is by cutting the dose of carbs and substituting any carb ingestion with a fiber or fat. Think whole fruits, veggies, and beans. And that way, the glucose rise will be slowed down by the fiber available in those foods. The other topic that had lasting impact is insulin response and sleep. If you sleep less than 6.5 hours, your body has to produce up to 50% more insulin to have the same effect if you had slept 8. These are two ideas that really helped shift my behaviors heavily in the last week. Changing gears a bit to our other podcast. This is with Steve Viscelli, Trucking and the Decline of the American Dream. This was on the Lex Fridman podcast. So a little background again, Steve Viscelli is an economic sociologist who studies work, labor markets, automation, and public policy. This podcast covers one of the most critical jobs in the country, trucking and the future with autonomous vehicles or driving. The interesting thing about this discussion is that it doesn't start with technology as you might think. The conversation begins with a discussion of truck drivers today and why they are taking the job, and then what skills do they have and all of the facets as sociology might look at. And I think it's helpful to understand the current situation before we talk about what changes may happen. And the first thing that struck me is that the automotive industry is going through at least two major changes that have become heavily woven: the transition to battery sources and autonomy. Autonomy doesn't mean a truck would run on batteries, because in theory, without an operator, it could go as far as the fuel source would allow it. In that way, a battery is not the only power source to power an ultra-distance vehicle of this nature. Imagine if a miniaturized nuclear reactor powered would be the range on that kind of vehicle. These are some of the thoughts that I just had bubble up to the surface while trying to think about what to summarize here. But there's much more that's covered here, and it goes into great nuance that I think many of the major news outlets either don't talk about or don't get into the detail with. It's really worth your time if you care about the economy and the supply chain network that seems to be going through all sorts of trouble right now. Next up, we have the article this week, which is Regenerative Medicine Breakthrough: Dancing Molecules Successfully Repair Severe Spinal Cord Injuries, from SciTechDaily. And this is so cool. I saw there's a whole bunch of information that you can find on the article, which has videos and different illustrations for you to find. What I'm going to use in supplement for this is two pictures you'll see on screen. And what these pictures represent are the actual spinal cords under a microscope. So the first one, so this is the longitudinal spinal cord section treated with the most bioactive therapeutic scaffold, and the regenerated axons are red, regrew within the lesion. And then this was all credited to Samuel L. Stoop in the laboratory at Northwestern University. And the second picture, which you'll see, is the longitudinal spinal cord section captured 12 weeks after injury. And the blood vessels are the red lines regenerated within the lesion. The lamin is stained green and the cells stained in blue. It's just really cool to see the differences between these two pictures and how that even if you could make this possible in severe injury, to restore connections within our nervous system is just amazing. And I think one day we may even get to a world where instead of having to put something in our brains like a BMI, a brain machine interface like Neuralink, you may be given the option that you could have something like that to restore bodily functions, to help be a surrogate nervous system where you're controlling directly with your brain those biomechanical limbs. Or we may even be able to regrow entire sections of our nervous system after major accidents. And it's just really fascinating. I think this is such a cool one step closer to a sci-fi future. Worth watching this week, we have Arcane from League of Legends on Netflix. This series is incredibly well done. One thing I don't elaborate too heavily here on Feeding Curiosity is that I am a lover of video games. I started content creating because of video games. But specifically what I love about Arcane is that when an idea transcends the medium it was created for or started in. In this case, many of the characters in this show are based off video game characters. The show is different than most others. Even if you haven't played League of Legends, this story serves as a backstory for many of the characters, and newcomers won't feel lost. The other aspect of the show is that it still takes its story and content seriously, and it is masterfully crafted, even though it's animated. The series was released over the last 3 weeks, with 3 episodes released each week, which is a very interesting release schedule, and it follows the 3-act structure of most stories. And overall, if you're a fan of fantasy, you'll find Arcane to be something you can't wait for more. With that, everyone, I will close, as always, with our quote. And this quote is from Terry Pratchett. "Why do you go away? So you can come back, so that you can see the place you came from with new eyes and extra colors. And the people there see you differently too. Coming back to where you started is not the same as never leaving." And with that, everyone, thank you all for joining me on the Feeding Frenzy. As always, I'd love to hear what you've been exploring in your weeks. If you have anything worth watching, reading, or listening to, I'd love to hear it. Please drop a comment in any form, either on social medias, or if you're watching this on YouTube, please feel free to leave it there. And it doesn't have to be related to any of the topics I shared here, but if you do have anything to add that may supplement anything that I said, please feel free to share it. And as always, you can find more of Feeding Curiosity over on our website, which is feedingcuriosity.net. And you'll find blogs, podcasts, and other editions of the Feeding Frenzy that you might enjoy. And so with that, everyone, thank you all for listening and watching. And I will see you all in the next edition.